Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, InaneDragon. Tonight, we return with another episode of InaneExplanations, focusing our attention on that barely understood, barely known to exist, misnamed cult, the Church of Christ Scientist, also known as Christian Science, and its followers referring to themselves as Christian Scientists. This church proclaims that its members are the only true practitioners of science. That's a capital S, folks, as revealed by the Bible and the teachings of Jesus. Okay, and we can work with this. This church traces its origins to the mid-1800s, when perennially ill Mary Baker Eddy turned to hokum remedies, including the mental healing of one Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. Quimby offered up several key principles to young Mary Eddy in the form of animal magnetism from his old mesmerism days, the name Christian Science, and the idea that all illness is traced back to the mind. In point of fact, all of the central tenets of Miss Eddy's religion were effectively lifted from the works of Quimby. Another key doctrine, that the physical world is in effect a group hallucination, and the spiritual world only seen by the properly devout, the true reality, was lifted from his teachings to Miss Eddy as well. Nonetheless, Mrs. Eddy's followers officially trace the history of their religion to what is known as the Fall in Lynn. When Mrs. Eddy, at that time Mrs. Patterson, slipped on an icy patch in the roads of the town of Lynn, Massachusetts. Eddy and the local paper called the injury severe, and Eddy claims to have been healed by reading a Bible passage. However, she can't tell us which Bible passage because she changes her story repeatedly, and the doctor who treated her injury said it wasn't all that severe. It really was meh. She fell on the ice, she slipped, she conked her head. Big whoop. From here, she starts writing on the Bible and her beliefs while offering to heal people by thinking really hard in exchange for money. Eventually, this led to a thriving industry of teaching others how to think the plague away. Again, for money. And that grew into an actual church with actual members today numbering around 500,000 worldwide. I know what you're thinking. Why am I picking on the tiny huckster religion that just wants your money for flim-flam, when there's the far more influential Church of Scientology that really wants your money for mirages? Because of the consequences of their beliefs, which I will now explain to you. The crucial difference between Christian Scientists and Christians is that the former believe there is no physical world. As I said before, it's just an illusion projected by your consciousness. This illusion of physicality stands in opposition to the world of spirit, which is God. Therefore, since all of reality is the spirit is God, and God is good, then the physical illusion must be sin and evil. Where does science get involved? Well, unlike real science, where we study what we can observe and establish hypotheses and theories predicated on these observations, the Church of Christ Scientist teaches that the Bible literally reveals knowledge, and proper study of it, with the framework provided by Eddy in her books, is divine science, the one true science that can be performed. How does one provide objective proof as required in any scientific discipline? Why, through miraculous healing via prayer, of course. This prayer isn't like what most Christians might be thinking. Christian Scientists basically engage in a reality-denying argument with themselves. They insist internally that the disease doesn't exist, and try to seek out any patterns of thought which might be considered unchristian, as these are the likely source of the disease and should be eradicated. Now here's the rub. Because the healing is said to rely on correcting the thinking of the patient, skepticism that it will work is one of the things which prevents the efficacy of mind healing. How great is that? An unfalsifiable hypothesis! To top things off, the use of traditional medicine is advised against in the church's writings, though not its website, for obvious PR reasons, on the grounds that it encourages wrongthink, and diseases that appear to be cured in such a manner will likely resurface, even worse than before, at some future date. After all, the underlying bad thoughts haven't been cured yet. Now, it should be understood that the limits of this mind healing are unlimited. The church holds Jesus as the first scientist to teach this method of healing. Anything Jesus did, up to and including bodily resurrection, is held to be within the power of the Christian Scientists. All this gets a little fuzzy when you start introducing the concepts of animal magnetism and mesmerism, methods that others can use to project their thoughts into you and make you ill, but that's getting a touch off the main concern, which is these people have children. These people don't believe in the use of medicine, and in the United States, 34 states plus the District of Columbia have carve-outs built into their child abuse and neglect laws for religious exemptions. That's right, in 34 states in the US, parents can refuse to treat their child's medical problems and is all good by the law. The only time the church itself has been held liable for its teachings was in the death of 11-year-old Ian Lundman. Ian died in 1989 of hyperglycemia. That's right, he died of high blood sugar, people. The mother and stepfather, as members of the church, sent for a Christian Scientist nurse to tend to him. So she prayed her prayers, didn't give him any insulin, and watched him die. Doctors consulted about the case testified that an injection of insulin would have saved Ian, right up until the last 2 hours of his life. Ian's father, rationally, sued not just the mother and stepfather, but the church and the nurse. He won the case, being awarded $9 million in punitive damages against the church itself, until the appeals court stepped in and found the outcome to be unconstitutional, because holding the church responsible for its outcomes would force it to abandon the central tenet of its faith. To borrow a phrase from Hitchens, religion poisons everything. Thankfully, the church's membership is in a long, steady decline. If trends hold, we won't have to worry about this sort of abuse over this particular religion. I picked the Church of Christ Scientist because this insanity is virtually the whole of their doctrine. Here's the problem, though. They're hardly alone in placing faith healing and a refusal of medical care into their doctrine. Jehovah's Witnesses are the most familiar religion that has dangerous restrictions on medical care which they impose on their children. But there are plenty of others with less well-known names, and even then, there are more mainstream denominations like Baptists who believe enough in faith healing that they will sometimes refuse treatment if they get convinced that it's just a test from the old God in the clouds to see if they really believe and will risk their child. So, I've got a call to action on this one. In the description, you'll find a link to a site that tracks these religious exemptions by state. Go see if your home is on the list. If it is, for crying out loud, at least write an op-ed for your paper. Call your representatives in the state assembly. Start a petition online. Do something! Europeans, I hope I'm wrong, but I doubt you'll find that every country on the continent is in the clear on this issue. If you do the research, I did try to check quickly myself, but couldn't find out which laws are over there and what they say on this topic. Sorry to have dropped down a rabbit hole of suck on this one, guys. I'll find you something that's just hilarious rather than hilariously depressing for the next Inane Explanations. Until then, I'm InaneDragon, and if you've enjoyed this inanity, consider subscribing for more of the same. As if you didn't already know you could, take a minute to comment and rate down below. I'd like to have your own thoughts on this. Of course, you can also follow me on Twitter and Minds.com at InaneDragon. For those who have the spare cash to keep me talking, take a gander over at my Patreon. As always, thank you for hearing me out, and have a good night.